the DNC stands for the Democratic National Committee. We're based here in Washington, D.C. And I guess kind of like in a nutshell, our job is to, we have a lot of jobs, but I think one of our main missions now under our chair, Tom Perez, is to empower our state parties, fundraise and provide resources for them to be able to have the capacity to reach out to different communities, build out the digital game, revamp their voter file, et cetera. And then the other part of it really is to focus on building up a pipeline of candidates to run for office, supporting elections, especially where there are, very, very, very steep consequences. And something that our committee has done really well is that we're not, if we think about back to Virginia, that election was super, super important, obviously, because this was the first election after, Trump had gotten elected. We invested a lot of our resources into organizing on the ground, bringing people together so they can talk to each other. And the turnout was incredible during that race. And we showed that there's a lot of energy behind Democrats to win. And Alabama, same thing. We invested in organizing, gave that campaign support. And when we won Alabama, obviously it was historic, but it just showed that we can win anywhere as long as we're continuing to support the right Democrats and putting money into the ground, into the state parties in specific elections. And of course, on the other side, we're not the only ones doing this work. As you mentioned, we have our sister committees, the DGA. They focus on governors. We have the DSCC. They focus on Senate races, and the DCCC, and the list goes on. But, we are trying to be as supportive and helpful as possible to all of the partners in the ecosystem. And then we're also getting ready, we want to make sure we do 2018 right. We're all in. And then once we can say that we did a good job there, then I'm sure we'll turn our attention to the 2020 presidential race and being good stewards of that process.
Anything to add to that, Vedant? In terms of, especially, I'm curious to hear how you coordinate with the other sister organizations, right? I think that's something that people get super confused about when they just hear all these acronyms that start with that letter D.
Right.
And they're like, well, what do you guys all do together or separately, individually? How does that work?
Well, so I think the DNC I think there's sort of there's two sides of the coin. The first side of the coin is kind of what Phil mentioned, is that, building infrastructure, capacity, logistical support, and things like that, so that Democrats can win elections up and down the ballot all across the country. And what that means is that we want candidates to be able to focus on actually, the voter interaction and the persuasion and the interfacing with the electorate and really moving on the needle. We don't want them to have to worry about, making sure that there's, necessarily volunteers on the ground. I mean, obviously, voters or candidates are going to recruit their own volunteers. We don't want them to have to worry about maybe having access to a voter file and stuff. All these things that we can help take off their plate, whether it be in field and comms and finance, in ways of supporting their endeavors, that's a big part of it. And then that is what we talk about when we say infrastructure building. And a lot of that is, working with state parties to make sure that they have what they need. This past year, the DNC has really focused on rolling out these state party innovation fund grants called SPIF grants, in which state parties all across the country, as they apply for them, are being awarded grants to do really amazing things in their states, whether it be enhanced capacity for digital organizing or hiring an organizer to, reach out to certain base communities or to, put infrastructure into other field resources. So that's a big part of what the DNC does. The other side of the coin, and this is, I think, a little bit more of a, communications and political thing, is to make sure that the American people and Democratic voters and the electorate, understand what is happening. And what I mean by that is, what is happening in the world, what's happening in the country. It's really easy in D.C. to sort of be in a little fishbowl and to be stuck in your little bubble and to, think that something is reaching your everyday voter if, like, Politico and The Hill and The Washington Post are covering it. But the fact of the matter is that most people and most Americans don't read The Hill and they don't read Politico and they don't read The Washington Post or even the New York Times necessarily, for that matter. They are relying on their local, media outlets or their local newspapers or things like social media to really digest the information out there. So part of my job as the Western Regional Press Secretary is to make sure that at least in the West, and there's an entire regional team, and how we've divvied up the country, is that in the West is that, voters and the American people in the West know exactly what's happening, whether it be, the things going on with healthcare or the tax plan and stuff. It is our job to make sure that that the information is getting through the channels that people use to digest them. And of course, that's going to mean the sort of more flashy newspapers like, the New York Times and things like that. But that's also going to mean stuff like the San Jose Mercury News and, the Orange County Registrar and and sort of smaller regional local papers that people rely on or local TV stations. So it's sort of a two-sided coin.